Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning into the second episode of Radio Free Ortona. To my left, out off in the corner, trying to figure out how to play the Internationale on a recorder he sees from an especially bourgeois 12-year-old who did not understand the dialectic nearly well enough, is my good friend Trent. And to my right, silently, not quite silently, but humming the Horse Vessel song to himself, is my other good friend Patty. And I am Steve. Today, we thought we were going to talk about climate change, and then we thought we were going to talk about the economics of that, and how our own home of Alberta kind of fits into that. And then we got talking and went back to progressivism again. And in the end, I don't know where we're going to go with this, but
I think it would help for us as well as the listeners to kind of define where we're each coming from and start hammering out some of those points: progressive, socialism, fascist, communist, because that's come up a lot in our offline discussions.
Like what they mean. Well, let's do that.
What they mean to us,
so
at least.
The basic foundations of our conversations.
Exactly.
The terminology. So this will be the glossary episode.
It will be the glossary episode.
There you go. Done deal. Let's do it.
Because I think it helps all of us. It's certainly going to help me, because we've already butted heads over what socialism means.
Yes, we have.
And conservatism, I seem to remember. What fiscal conservatism means to you guys as well as to me. To me, it's economic policy. To you guys, it's less government.
Well, fiscal conservatism is an
Is
economic.
policy,
Is an economic policy. Yeah.
Well, from my own point of view, I said this in a previous conversation that in the 80s, conservatives, and probably specifically Republicans who had a fairly good possession of the culture of American and I guess North American and Western culture in the 80s under Reagan, kind of started to redefine everything that was welfare as socialism. And we're finding out that doesn't, I don't think, really works very well. So when people talk about the social democracies of Scandinavia, in my view, they're not really socialists. They're welfare states. Kevin Williamson from National Review pointed out, he said that, an economy, and a capitalist economy can support a lot of welfare. You can burden the economy with a lot of welfare and you'll get results, even the results that you're looking for. But as soon as you start socializing things, which is like nationalism and seizing,
or nationalizing assets,
nationalizing assets
in Venezuela.
Yeah, then things go haywire in a hurry. So it gets complicated because Norway's biggest oil company is state owned and is in fact called Statoil. But
Norway's going to be a complicated example because I think
exactly.
it's going to be the one that I'm going to raise, especially since Alberta's economy has the same approximate population and Norway's about the same size, and it's based on oil. So it's constantly raised as why aren't we more like this from certain circles.
Sure. But if you look at other economies or other Scandinavian states like Sweden is much more traditionally capitalist. Very little state intervention in the economy as far as having state-owned corporate entities. Denmark, I think the same is true as well.
Oh yeah, even more so. I mean,
yeah, exactly, right?
Or
so
less so, depending on how you look at it.
More traditionally, right? Yeah. And most of what we think of, and the progressive Europeans are still fairly capitalist. Even like guys like Macron are not like advocating nationalization of civilian assets or privately owned assets, right? So
I think
that's my personal distinction, I guess, between welfare and socialism, and I think it's an important distinction to make. So when like we say, Norway complicates things, but from the most part, I think it's a big deal to not refer to welfare as socialism.
Okay, so that's the distinction.
For me.
Social democracy is welfare. Socialism is nationalization of assets. Not to use the Statoil example as a paintbrush for the whole conversation. My question would be, is it automatically bad for something to be government owned, for a company to be government owned? Let's say if it's poorly run. I mean, one of the arguments you two and I keep having is government involvement in things. And we all actually agree that government is not particularly efficient at a lot of things. But if the business model of a particular sector or a particular company is not ultimately, again, broad strokes, in the interests of the population of the jurisdiction within it which it operates, is it by definition ahead of time a bad thing for the government to step in and say, we think we could do this better?
Yes.
Why?
Because a capitalist economy will not allow an enterprise that is counterproductive to the needs of its customer base. It won't thrive, right?
Capitalism is, in essence, voluntary exchange. That is capitalism.
It is.
Two parties voluntarily exchanging, and if one party feels the exchange is no longer in their interest, they decline.
All right.
So a business that has an exploitative or negative business model, as Steve points out, will not exist very long, unless it is propped up by the state. But again, that's not part of the capitalist model of voluntary exchange. That's now coercive exchange.
Right. So I think that's where we get into another one of our definitions, quote unquote, true capitalism, because this is another discussion we've had. When we talk subsidies, when we talk about tax breaks, when we talk about, things like that, when we talk about monopolies, right? And in Canada, the whole concept of monopolies is a lot different to the rest of the world, just because of the distance between urban centers. So we have had de facto monopolies in certain sectors along the way. So are we agreeing that we're not necessarily seeing true capitalism at work in Alberta, in Canada, in the U.S.?
I would totally agree.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I would say what we have is externality capitalism, which is kind of harkens back to Williamson's ideas that a capitalist system of voluntary exchange will carry a huge amount of dead weight before it collapses. And that's what we are now. We're carrying a massive number of externalities with us that capitalism in and of itself is beneficial enough, it is resilient enough, it is adaptive enough that it can still function with all of these boat anchors that it's dragging around. But yeah, we're a long ways away from a system of purely voluntary exchange. We've piled a massive number of externalities upon it.
Now, it's interesting using the word exchange because I think the presumption has been up to this point that we're talking about exchange of capital for produce. We're talking about consumerism, right? But there's also exchange of labor, which I feel falls into the, are we talking about voluntary exchange? Are we talking about coercion capitalism, right? And I think there's an overlap in our society, particularly since...
What's coercion capitalism?
Well, is that not a term that you guys just put out there a few minutes ago?
Oh, coercive, yeah. Sure.
Coercive, sorry.
Yeah.
That's
where I do not have the freedom of choice in the exchange.
Well, it becomes down to power,
right?
right?
An example would be car insurance.
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, especially like car insurance in a place like Saskatchewan or BC, where you have government
or
insurance monopolies.
healthcare. Healthcare.
Or healthcare, yeah.
There's only one, I have to get it. I have no choice in that. I have no choice in the provider.
Right.
It's something that's completely done for me. That would be an example. But I'd also say it's in terms of, say, the CBC. I have no choice as to whether or not I consume CBC. That money is stolen from me by a government.
No, you have no choice whether or not you support the CBC. You do have choice about whether you
Oh,
consume
this is true. This is true.
Right.
I have to support it. I am not given. I have no voluntary control over that exchange.
Well, and to that matter, with the system set up by the Trudeau government, we have no choice in the matter if we support all taxpayers support all media companies or all of
That's true.
their favorite
Yeah.
media companies now with the
Yeah.
subsidy they provide to.
Yeah,
what
yeah.
they
Like
call
I
the
have no
media.
choice as to with state sanctioned media.
Yeah.
That is what I would say call a coercive exchange.
Okay, now we're bleeding into some finer areas.
Oh, sure, but you asked me what I meant by it.
No,
That's
absolutely.
But if we get back, one of the things I want to point out about capitalism is it is the best, or it is essentially to use a fraught word, a means of collective understanding of value and a collective determining of value, right? It is the most powerful way to determine what is valuable and what is important.
Certainly the most democratic.
And yeah,
Because
the most democratic because it is
everybody
voluntary.
gets a vote.
Yeah. Right?
Oh man, I'm struggling with this one. Yes, I agree with you. Like for the record, I mean, we've had the discussion as we're all soldiers. We've had the discussions about unions. I've been exposed to unions, and they drive me insane. They have a role in our society. It's different than it was in the 60s, and it's different than it was in the 30s and in the 19th century. They have a role. But I agree with you that freedom of choice and individual drive and determination, self-determination, those are all very important things. I know I certainly wouldn't have any sort of career whatsoever if I had to go into a union. Crap, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, I'm getting old, folks.
I think you took an issue with our concept of capitalism as a voluntary exchange. You're saying that some issues, some parts of capitalism may be non-voluntary?
Well, to a certain extent, I think it was something you guys just said about it being the best thing out there.
Oh, yes, the most democratic form of determining value.
And if you take that, thank you for reclarifying that. If you take that analogy of democracy and doing a crossover between economics and politics, and inserting the term of power in there, it's not always fair under capitalism. Whether it's the exchange of labor or the exchange of money as a consumer. Again, if someone gets a monopoly, you can point to the pharmaceutical industry these days, right? That's the big one, right? Where you get a life-saving drug, and someone will acquire it and drive up the price because they can. And I don't see fairness in that. I think it's unethical. And I think ethics is going to be a big concept we come up with regarding capitalism.
Can you define what you mean by because they can?
Because people will pay anything for their loved ones to survive, for themselves to survive. I mean, you can take that conversation off and make something of it all on its own.
There is a lot of conversations we had there and a lot of podcasting we had there, but from especially using the example of pharmaceuticals without trying to get in the weeds, but libertarians will definitely have an issue because libertarians are not big on IP protections.
Right.
And so when you get into places, especially pharmaceuticals, usually the reason a pharmaceutical company can charge whatever they want is because there's a patent on the medication or that they've developed, right? So
right.
So then they get to set the value, and they're going to try and recover their R&D costs. So they will, or whatever. But as soon as a drug loses IP protection, price goes down.
How many people die in the meantime? There's been plenty of popular movies made about things like this, right? It didn't save so-and-so's wife, right?
Sure.
Well, what I don't understand is, okay, like let's say you're talking about a situation where somebody has a life-saving medication.
Yeah.
And and they can charge whatever they want for it. And you're saying that can be really unethical because they could gouge. They could really.
There was an example, and forgive me, I am going to go out of my way to mention this, even though I have none of the facts behind me right at the moment. So this is purely anecdotal. But there was a guy 3-4 years ago, maybe a bit longer. It was an existing product. It was being sold for X amount. He acquired the company and he jacked the price up by something ridiculous like
insulin.
No, it wasn't insulin. It was something.
I recall this.
It was a medication, but it was obviously it was an IP protected medication. I remember.
Yeah.
And he jacked it up like 1,400% or something
like that. Yeah, because it went from like less than $20 a dose to like over 1,000 or something.
Yeah.
Some ridiculous.
Yeah, it was huge.
And so that's why I'm saying because they can. That is the example that's in my mind when I say because they can. He appeared on a number of talk shows or not talk shows necessarily, but he was interviewed on national news programs out of the U.S.
Public enemy number one. I remember.
Yeah. But you know
what happened?
He just disappeared because the news cycle moved on to something else. Right?
He lowered the price, though, didn't he?
I don't know that he did.
I believe that he did.
He did have to.
Did he have to?
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay. So here we go. Who made him?
Market forces.
Market forces.
It's not just, see, this is what we're talking about when we say it's the most democratic system. Mm-hmm. It's not just, and when we say market forces, we're talking about voluntary exchange. He became public enemy number one. He was reviled in his community. He couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't get service in restaurants. No one wanted to associate with him. No one would do voluntary exchange with him, even a polite conversation.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, I do recall it. He tired of being, oh wow.
Oh, okay. Steve has just brought up, what's the date on this? December 2015.
He dropped the price back down simply because, he just got tired of being such a villain. Yes, Martin Shkreli. That's who it is. Yes. Doesn't say what that drug was, though, does it? Well,
the price of a drug used to treat a life-threatening disease by 5,000%.
For the audience listening to this, Steve has just put up on our monitor in the studio here an article about Martin Shkreli, the person we're talking about, how he got arrested for.
Daraprim was the name of the drug.
Yeah.
So he was arrested on something unrelated in 2015.
Toxoplasmosis. There you go. He got arrested for some, securities.
Looks like securities issues.
Something like this.
Is there anything farther down the article about whether he dropped it and by how much?
Probably not in this one.
At any rate.
Anyway. Yeah. So that is, I'm impressed to hear that. But to that point, sounds great. So somehow social pressures on him became such that he went, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah. So the guy had if not a conscience, he certainly had a concern about his PR.
Well, it was his overall quality of life. The rest of the community made him an offer that he really couldn't refuse. Now, just off the top, medicine was completely unregulated in the 19th century. I don't know. Like, do you have any other historical examples of something like this happening? And I'm thinking, I'm
not off the top, man. That's the one that's
in the 19th century? Because again, it was completely unregulated.
Oh, the 19th century. I mean, when in the 19th century? We weren't even using anesthetics or disinfectants
1880s,
for surgeons.
1890s. Is there like an example that we could draw from?
I don't know. Coca-Cola had cocaine in it back then, so
this column here. Why did it take so long to go generic?
Okay, the paragraph again for those listening is that this medication that Shkreli jacked the price of is not novel. It was discovered in 1952. But when he jacked the price of it, other manufacturers weren't unable to start making their own versions, And that's because of the FDA's drug approval process, even for generics, is slow, inefficient, and bloated. And it just made a massive time delay for competitors to get alternatives available to the public. And so that's why Shkreli thought that he could make, potentially, that's why he thought he could make a short-term cash grab, because he had a de facto monopoly. Maybe not a permanent one, but he had a government-induced monopoly for at least a certain time period.
Exactly. And not based on IP protections, but based on government inefficiency.
Just based on government inefficiency and incompetence. How very interesting. Your thoughts?
I'm looking something up right now. It's so timely, right? Because what you're saying is...
He's got a laptop right in front of him.
He's got a laptop. That's an insult.
Well, the reason I'm doing this is because there was a post on Facebook by someone who's referencing an article from LinkedIn, and it's about human slavery and about the attitudes towards it, right?
Okay, attitudes towards slavery.
It resonated with me because of what you just said about the social pressures on this fellow, and why he backed down and actually lowered the price. I'm going to see if I can pull this up. Okay. Unfortunately, it wasn't shareable.
While you're doing that, I'm gonna take this opportunity to throw something in here, which I think whenever we have a discussion of what is socialism, what is capitalism, what is progressivism, what is conservatism, I like to back it up to the lowest resolution point I possibly can and look for a binary difference, where I say at the most elemental, at the, 10,000 zoom out level, what is the fundamental difference? And I'm going to throw this out there. That the right believes that the individual is the basic unit of sovereignty. The left believes the state is the basic unit of sovereignty.
It depends on which version of the left or which approach to it. Matt, I've got a couple of answers to this.
You could substitute the word group for state.
I would say public for state.
Sure.
And
Fair.
by state, we mean what clouds it is government, right? And you and I have had some great, the three of us, sorry, don't mean to exclude you, Steve. It's always Patty and I throw most of this.
Throwing stuff at each other, and Steve
poor old Steve's just catching the
just
flack.
Stirring the fire every now and then.
I mean, we've had some great conversations about what should be the role of government. And for the listeners, I think we're both surprised to find that we agree more than we thought we might.
Than we thought we would, yes.
Because I'm not all about big government. But that's what it comes down to, right? The other thing I would say is I've long been very leery of the whole left-right thing. Just as a single dimensional set of extremes with a bunch of great. I like the four quadrant thing, which has left and right and individual and group, or individual and social, right? Because I think Steve and I agree on a lot of things on an individual level. It's just the left versus right thing, right? And that's where the distinctions are to be made. But as when it comes down to individualism, there's a lot of overlap. Likewise, I would look at the Soviet Union under Stalin. That was left authoritarian, right?
But not say under any other Soviet leader?
Well, he was the worst.
He was the worst.
Right. But I would say, okay, the Soviet Union was left authoritarian, right? But you get right authoritarian governments as well, as we've discussed today offline. Right, many times.
Well, and again, this is why I want to get into this, because this is where I like to start taking apart. Okay, what makes something right? What makes something left? And I'm going to expand a little bit further on my previous supposition of the emphasis on sovereignty between the individual or the group. I'm going to say where the rubber hits the road, where this becomes practically applied. If your locus of sovereignty is the individual, then your basic philosophy is let each individual live their life as they choose. If your locus is the group or the public or anything other than the individual. Your philosophy or your action must be imposing a will upon other people.
And my counterpoint, my response to that is quite naturally that it is never going to be either or.
Do you dispute it, though?
No. Well,
you don't.
Actually,
what?
hang on.
Oh, back up the truck. What do you mean you don't
dispute
it?
I'm responding to something completely
You have
different
to
right now.
dispute it. Otherwise, this conversation is over.
I have to figure out what it is I'm responding to exactly, first of all. But
that's more like it.
What I'm going to say is
the left about coercion or not?
No.
Then tell me why.
Not all of the left is about coercion. Not all of the right is about coercion.
You're right. I'm saying the right cannot be about coercion.
And yet it is.
No. I'm saying that is not right. I think that is something that the left has imposed on the right to create a moral ambiguity and equivalency, and it is false. But I want you to go back and explain to me how the left is not about, fundamentally, at its core, coercion.
The left... I'm reaching back in my mind, and like I said, my short-term memory is shot these days. So I'm reaching back to what you said a minute and a half ago.
For those listening, I'm taking a great personal joy in the expressions on Trent's face right now.
And I was saying earlier today that one of the biggest surprises for me is when I find myself on the defensive here, because I let myself get very secure with these two. And then this happens.
And to be fair, I devote a lot of time thinking of questions that are very, very difficult for you to answer.
To me, it comes down to...
I'm not whipping this stuff up, buddy. There's a lot of time behind the steering wheel thinking of this.
As I've said before, I do not like black and white. I do not like the extremes, right? I do not like simple definitions. They're great for starting points conceptually.
Yep.
But you have to be able to maneuver from there. Right.
So think of this
as
a conceptual starting point.
Right. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So my counterpoint to that is the history of mankind, the whole human experience at any given point in time is always in the gray area between those two things. And it comes down to power, right? And how we define what's acceptable as social groups. So, using your case in point, is it right for the individual to be able to do whatever they want? No, it isn't. Because if the individual wants to do things that impact the other individuals very, very negatively, then there has to be a way of preventing that from happening.
Right.
So otherwise, it's anarchy, and it's all about power.
To borrow a phrase, the right of your fist ends at the right of my face.
Exactly.
Right.
So that, to me, there negates... You can't have a wholesale, the rights of the individual govern all.
So then, can we say that so long as you do no harm to anyone else, then you should be allowed to live your life as you choose?
Yes, but now you're getting into a very, that it's completely intangible to define harm, especially in these ludicrous times, because, anyone
harm
now
is
can...
a pretty broad definition.
Harm, yeah. And so people are choosing to define harm as being offended.
Yes.
Right? And which I just think, you know what? There are people you're not going to agree with out there. Not everyone's going to agree. And this is where you and I will agree on the right and the right of the individual. Everyone has a right to their opinion. There are going to be assholes out there. And they might be assholes on some sort of empirical scale, or they might be assholes on, a personal scale, right? The fact that they bother you, the fact that they disagree with you, does not automatically give reason for offense. In fact, if you're offended by everything, and this is another thing we're all going to agree on, I'm pretty sure, then you're a problem. You've got a problem, right? Yeah, I mean,
But then if our locus is the group or the public, then is not the left de facto about somebody determining what the will or the best interest of that public is and then imposing it upon everyone regardless of their own preferences or desires to opt out?
that's why I say, the minute you take you set your standard on the right. So here's the right end of the spectrum,
Yes.
right? Right. The
As a
minute
conceptual starting point.
the minute you say that that's not quite acceptable, that can't quite work, right? You're de facto, by definition, going to be left of that,
Sure.
right? So again, to
Yeah,
me,
like if we're talking about like a 1 to 100 scale,
yeah,
1 being extreme left, one or like extreme theoretical left,
Yeah.
that's not possible, and 100 being extreme theoretical right, that's not possible.
Yeah.
As soon as you move to 99 or 98,
yeah,
you're to the left of that. Sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Makes sense.
So that's where I would start this discussion. Right. It would be great if everybody could do that without negatively impacting everybody else.
Right.
Right.
But we can't.
Or
So we
or
need
anybody else.
So we need to find some kind of compromise.
Exactly.
Of that
And that's the
ideal.
gray area. And again, to me, you got two things going. That has been the history of the human experience, is finding what that social dynamic is,
Yeah, where that tipping point is.
right? And where between 0 and 100 that lies.
So on
right?
that 49 to 51 kind of point,
Yeah.
so anywhere left of that, is that not about coercion?
Not,
By definition.
not necessarily.
How so?
You can see it even nowadays. But again, as I've argued many times before, I feel that human history has been a dropping from 100, right?
You mean a dropping from 1?
No, a dropping from 100 towards 1.
How so?
Well, again, as we've discussed, Magna Carta.
Yeah, but
as you
how
pointed
is-
out, there were dark
Okay,
ages.
but like let's say the reign of say medieval Europe in the Dark Ages. How would you see that as an individualist society where the individual has political sovereignty?
It would have been better than life under the system of Genghis Khan, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but again,
know.
how do you see that the individual in, say, medieval Europe had any kind of, like, there was slavery.
There was slavery. So
the average person had no rights. They were bound to the land. They were in bondage to an aristocracy.
yes.
The aristocracy was in bondage to their feudal lord, right
Right.
up unto the single individual who was the embodiment of the medieval state in the holder of the crown. So who imposed their will upon everyone else. So how could you say that medieval Europe is somewhere in the 90s in our imaginary scale here?
I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's in the 90s. I'm saying
We're
it's
saying like near 100.
I'm saying it's lower than 100.
How could you say it was anywhere higher than 50?
Is it lower than now?
Is it lower than now? No.
Really?
Yeah.
So authoritarian medieval Europe
Is more right wing to
is
you
more right wing
than our society
than our
today?
current,
Yes.
current situation.
Absolutely.
In economic policy.
Well, as you just raised, right? The
So
individuals.
you're saying slavery is a right wing concept. I want to make sure I understand you here.
Okay, I'm going to be very careful how I word this. All right. I am not accusing the right of
Okay.
endorsing slavery.
Okay.
Right. I'm saying in the past,
Yeah.
slavery, to me, is something of the right
Why?
because it's authoritarian. It's
So
and that's why I'm
Right
very
wing
careful
is
to say,
automatically authoritarian.
yeah.
How so?
Compare a slave to what you were saying. Oh, okay. Okay. So now we're getting into. I see where you're going with this. Okay. Because you're talking
the
about
right
individual
is the
rights.
Antithesis of authoritarianism. Yeah, the right
Yeah.
is about the individual and individual rights.
I see where you're coming from on this. All right. I don't know where slavery would even begin to fall on that. Right?
It would be
I
the
suppose
complete antithesis of individual rights.
Wouldn't slavery be at 1?
I would think slavery would
Slavery's
be
at 1. Anarchy's at 100 and slavery's at 1.
Yeah. Because if there are no individual, say 1 on our scale.
Mm-hmm.
Like one is everybody's enslaved to one person.
Yes, exactly. The complete
And,
absence
so
of
this
individual rights whatsoever.
And this is where I feel the one-dimensional graph is inappropriate, right? This is where we have to develop the two-dimensional graph with the 4 quadrants and the 2 axes, right? Because to me, and
Share with me your vision.
this is purely personal, but to me the left is about the well-being of the individual. Right? Every individual should have certain minimum things, certain minimum rights, expectations,
Are you thinking
hopes,
more,
dreams?
Not imperial, material? For example, housing, access to potable water.
In this case, we're talking about slavery.
Okay.
Right? I do not see the people that we would generically call the left endorsing slavery, right? They may endorse a whole bunch of, debatable coercion, and we'll have those individual conversations along the way.
Yeah.
But there's no one on the current left right now that is going to endorse slavery, right? That's why I said we've got groupthink, and we've got individualism, and then we've got left and right.
See, it's curious to me that you would say that, because to me, the essence of slavery is the alienation of one from their own labor. And the left has no problem with alienating people from the fruits of their labor. I mean, that's the whole essence of redistribution of wealth, right? You earned it, you created that wealth, but now the state's going to reach in and take it away from you simply because they can, or they feel that they have the power to do so and that they're acting within the right.
I would argue that there's a third thing, right? Simply because they can, maybe. Simply because...
You're right. Let me withdraw that, because that is not incorrect. It's not simply because they can. They have a very good, a very profound ideological reason for it.
And that's just it. They have the power to do it, and they have the ideological reason to do it.
They have a reason for doing it. It's not simply on a whim.
And for the record, until very recently, I have not had a problem paying my taxes. At the city level for owning a house, provincially, or federally because of my income tax.
I think we all understand taxes are a necessary evil.
Yeah.
The question is,
to what extent?
How much? Yeah.
To what extent? For what purpose?
Yes.
And there are 2 more things for me that go with that. How efficiently are they used?
Yeah.
Right. And I have a big problem with that, and that's where we're all going to agree on big government.
Yeah.
Subject for another time. But the other thing is, it's really starting to piss me off how much the CRA will crawl up my butt sometimes, and they have a couple of times. When you've got the Panama Papers pointing out that there are massive companies, like KPMG, I believe was the company that was sheltering its clients illegally. And the government's putting up with this. The CRA is putting up with this. They came up with special deals for these people that they would get amnesty for this crime, right? So they're chasing me down for comparative nickels and dimes. And I have a serious problem with that. So that's where, I'm very much about individual rights there.
I would agree with you on that I do think that's wrong. Like, that violates my sense of equality before the law. That if you're wealthy enough, loopholes are deliberately made in the tax code so that you can hide income from the government. And if the means for that is it's only going to be available for people who are wealthy enough to afford the full-time accountant who can find those loopholes, where the average, the working class, if I can use, a favorite blanket term, they can't afford that, so they get hit with the high taxes.
No, the working or the middle classes. I mean, this is only for the elite.
Yes.
Right, and that to me again is the biggest part of the left-right equation to me. We talk about distribution of wealth. You're talking about separating people from their wealth, right? From their labor.
Yes.
Right? And that's where it starts to become an issue for me, right? There is this elite out there, and this is where labor / money becomes power. And that's self-perpetuating. And that, to me, is fundamentally what the right is about. That's what conservatism is all about. It's conserving power. It's conserving power bases in the hands of the status quo. And, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? We had two conversations that resonated with me in parallel after I'd had a chance to think about them. The one is, we talked about as soldiers, if we ended up in the afterlife, when we had to face the members of the Great Generation who had fought the real war.
What would we say?
And if we would be able to look them in the eyes and say we were soldiers in the way that they had been, and we had lived up to the example they had set us.
Fought for a just cause.
Right? And not just for the cause, but in the manner that we had fought it.
Yeah, we fought as professionally and with dignity and with honor.
Right. And we had a separate conversation, I think after that, where I said, I basically, to distill it down, I have no time for someone who's the CEO of a company and he's making 8 figures a year when there is a single person on this planet that is starving to death.
Do you find that those two do you see a cause and effect relationship between them?
Well, so this is what I thought. This is what occurred to me, right? To expand on the previous conversation. And I'm going to overlap the concept of me as a human, me as a man, me as a soldier, right? Me in my soul, deep down, if I get to heaven and I'm looking anyone in the eye, and I'm not, like, I would not expect that CEO to be there where I end up, right? And if he was, I'm not going to look him in the eye. Okay. But it's also partly looking at either the men of the greatest generation we were talking about, or some sort of metaphorical equivalent thereof, just on a more human level. Being able to look them in the eye and go, I didn't put up with that shit.
Okay, right? So let's say nearby where I live, there's like a dollar store. Mm-hmm. And there's like a McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty much right side by side.
Yeah.
So the guy who owns Dollar Store, the founder of that business, who basically gets franchise fees from all of these dollar stores popping up everywhere. The guy's probably making tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
The guy flipping burgers, the teenager in the McDonald's, is making minimum wage.
Yeah.
What's the cause and effect relationship between those two?
Well, I mean, you've raised a very good example of kind of, even if we weren't going through the times that we are right now, that there is going to be a bottom end of, opportunity and assets.
Okay.
Right? And, to me, I get that. I mean, that's how even a social democracy
there's always going to be an income distribution.
Right.
Okay. But so, you mentioned specifically, you linked the two specifically.
Yeah.
And you're not the only one. I don't think you can have this conversation with someone of a progressive bent without them framing it in those explicit terms, that I cannot justify morally somebody making tens of millions of dollars when there are people living in poverty. So what's the connection?
Okay,
there has to be a connection, because you wouldn't have mentioned it, and everyone else wouldn't have mentioned it, unless there was some kind of cause and effect relationship that you perceive.
Okay, so I'm going to separate two things out there, right? I'm not agreeing at this point in the conversation that the CEO should be making tens of millions of dollars, but we're assuming that that's happening. I'm not saying that's right. Yeah. What I was agreeing with is that, yes, you're going to have people flipping burgers and making minimum wage. Right. And yes, you're going to have a dollar store. And that's where the person who's making minimum wage is going to buy some of their stuff. Right? I think actually to go back to my original statement, I would not want to be, I could not go to whatever version of atheist heaven I'm talking about.
That's right. You're
Right?
not a religious guy.
And look other human beings in the eye as someone who had made 8 figures a year and bitched and moaned about paying taxes on it, right? When it comes down to it, you know, I would love to make 8 figures a year, right? You know, if I'm doing something that's worth it and it pulls that much in, great.
Right.
Am I going to complain about paying 75% tax on that? Hell no.
If I read you right, you
Yeah.
don't have a problem with there being an income distribution.
No.
You just wish it was a little more compressed.
I think
That the low end wasn't so low and the high end wasn't so high. That they were just a little bit closer together.
yeah.
Okay. So again, what is the cause and effect relationship between the high and the low end?
The cause and effect?
Yes. How is the high end being so high causing the low end to be so low?
I mean that's
What's the connection there?
capitalism. It's part of capitalism.
Yeah, but okay,
right?
but give me something that's actionable. What is that guy making 8 figures a year doing that's causing this other guy to work for minimum wage?
He's he's keeping costs low,
Okay.
right? In the interest of the shareholders. And the shareholders are happy to pay him 8 figures a year to run the company in such a way that the costs are lower, right?
Okay.
So the lower you keep the costs at the individual worker level,
Okay.
the lower you keep the costs at the the goods, the cost of goods sold, yada yada yada, all that stuff,
yeah.
right? Your cost of materials, the more profits there are, the more revenues there are, right? I get that, right? But when someone's literally making 8 figures a year, there's got to be a way to cut that down to 7 figures a year and give the poor guy flipping burgers $1 more an hour. Every single person in that company flipping burgers could have $1 more an hour.
Okay, so
at that guy's expense.
because I've tried to do this 3 times, is it safe to say that you admit that there isn't a cause and effect relationship? The two things are happening at the same time,
Yeah.
but they're not actively causing the other.
I think they are. The
CEO
guy at the top who's making 8 figures
So-
has the power to define what the
but
wage of the
only
person at the bottom of the
within
chain
his
is.
own organization.
Yeah.
And the number of people in his own organization are a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people overall who are at the bottom of the income distribution. You also have people in the middle of the income distribution who are making, what we call middle class, even making 6-figure incomes,
Yeah.
who would be part of that low end if what you're saying is causing this. If that was applied, well, why doesn't it apply to the welder who's making $125,000 a year? Where I'm going with this is, I don't think you can really establish a cause and effect relationship. That this is really
I disagree. In fact, I would argue I have raised it because
am I missing
for
something here, Steve? Because I'm not seeing like an
oh
A to B
yeah
to C
okay
to D
fucking
connection.
getting tag team now.
Like,
oh, here we go.
Is it just me or what?
And actually, before you speak in, I'd just like to respond to what you had to say. Right? I think I have argued the point.
Okay.
Because if you take every CEO
Yeah.
of every company who's making 8 figures,
Yeah, we're just going to throw
whose employees at the bottom end are making minimum wage,
at the bottom end.
and you extrapolate that across all the companies who
Yeah.
have that situation, there's your pattern. There's your cause and effect, right? That is how it happens. The shareholders are willing to pay the guy at the top 8 figures because he's keeping the costs low.
Okay.
If the costs go up, right? What's always blown my mind is that guy doesn't need. There's nobody. You cannot tell me that anybody needs 8 figures a year. They don't need that, right? You can take one of those figures away, cut that person's income to 10%. They're still making 7 figures a year, right?
Okay.
And you can take the other 90%, distribute across the bottom. The impact on the shareholders is nil, right? But I'm not even having that argument.
I think we should. I would like to later
but we
on.
were okay. We can. But the reason I actually brought this up is because we were talking about taxes, right? I have a huge problem with someone who's making that much money and bitches about how they have to pay more tax than someone else. Like, boo fucking who?
Right, because
Right?
you were saying that
And-
you feel that we should be able to knock that 8-figure down to 7-figure
Right.
and redistribute that.
And that's where we get into a society. And this is a social thing. Again, if we talk about Sweden, yes, ABBA left because taxation rate is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But the rest of Swedish society can live with that, right?
Or they have no choice. But go on. Sorry, that was a shot.
they have no choice, but
Yeah.
they accept it, right? Because it's
They can't exactly afford to relocate like ABBA can, or the author of Pippi Longstocking. For a while, she was paying something like 104% income taxes.
oh wow. Well, I'd love to see that mathematical formula.
That
but
was kind of
I can see
she
that
was earning
happening.
so
right?
much money that the formula pushed her into.
Okay, well, that's
it became a big talking point in Sweden.
yeah, and hopefully it got fixed, right? I mean, that would be a good reason to fix things.
did.
But that was the reason I brought it up. And then that bleeds over into the conversation about taxation,
Okay.
efficient government. What are my taxes being used for, right? So again, I don't mind paying my taxes.
Okay.
I just want everyone to be contributing, right? I'm more Western European, Scandinavian.
I
that
would
way.
have a lot easier time with this argument if I could see how somebody earning a lot of money causes other people across the board to earn less. Like, for example, I have a really hard time understanding how Connor McDavid's salary is causing somebody to have their wages suppressed. Like, I just don't understand how that works. Like, I don't understand how, say, the guy who runs a transportation company.
Now you're talking pure entertainment capitalism, and that's a whole conversation.
I don't understand how an actor making $20 million for a single film is suppressing the wages of the kid who puts butter on the popcorn in the concession. Like, I don't understand how that's linked.
I'll answer that question in a sec. Conceptually, I'll respond to it. I'm not going to answer it. I'll respond to that.
Sure.
Right. But I asked for some grace from Steve, and Steve, I mean, Patty and I talk a great big game about letting Steve talk, and then he had one opportunity to talk, and I shut him down. So.
Because he's been digging up stuff and throwing it on the screen. That's it. The headline that Steve has pulled up for us is from CNBC.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
McDonald's
Oh, look at that. That's 8
CEO
figures.
made
So
$10.8 million. That's it?
That's it.
I would have thought he made more than that. I mean, McDonald's is a pretty big global operation. I would have thought they would have made more.
So,
all right,
let's do some math.
Okay.
So, imagine you take away, we'll just say $9 million. We'll leave them with 1.8.
Okay.
According to Macro Trends, in 2020, McDonald's total number of employees was 200,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
how many hours
Okay.
can you add $1 to each of those $200,000 guys for taking away the $9 million?
Well, let's do the math. $9 million divided by 200. That's 5 times 9, 45. That's
I'll whip out the calendar.
$45. Okay.
So you pay an extra buck for 45 hours.
So you
Right.
want to do $9 million divide by 200,000?
Yeah, it's $45. It's $45 per
So you can pay
employee.
those 200,000 employees an extra buck an hour for 45 hours.
Yeah. And that's all they get.
Okay, fair
Wow.
enough
So
math.
That
Fair
didn't
enough
last
math.
very long. And you're taking 90% of his income away.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Well, which raises so it raises the value, the question of why? Why is that worth that? Right? Why is it
why
worth?
is that guy
why
worth
is
10.8?
Yeah, like again, and you raise the entertainment, you raise
Right.
the sports, right?
Right.
I've always had.
My argument is he's worth that because he's keeping 200,000 people employed. And
Well-
hopefully in a year, he's got 210,000 people
Who
employed.
determines the salary of a CEO?
The board.
The board. Who's the board?
The
Shareholders.
board is a bunch of people elected by the shareholders.
The majority shareholders.
Yeah.
And then who are elected by the shareholders at large. How big is a board? And say a company like McDonald's.
Well, it's probably something around 15 people, I would guess.
Yeah, say 12 to 20.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
So 12 to 20 people who have skin in that game, who
some of them are shareholders,
are heavily invested, and also because they're heavily invested, they know something of the industry. They made a voluntary decision with their own money to pay this guy $10.8 million.
Yeah.
But you're saying you know better than them.
I'm not saying I know better, right?
You're
I mean,
saying
that's an arrogant statement, and I challenge you on that.
Yes. You're saying that
you're
no,
wording
no,
it that way.
$10.8 million, that's wrong. You shouldn't be allowed to pay that guy $10.8 million. I, who do not work for your company, am not invested in your company, don't know anything about your company, I want to step in there and pay that guy less.
All right. I have two responses to this.
Let her rip.
Right.
I'm ready for you.
The one is, I don't think it's accurate or appropriate. I think it's very provocative for you to say to me, you think you know better.
What do you think my job is here?
I will say, I would characterize it this way.
Yeah.
It is definitely a feeling, right? So there's emotional skin in the game for this for me.
Yeah.
Right? But it's based on logic.
Okay.
Right.
I'm interested in the logic.
So to me, it's just the logic. I'm just looking at this and I'm just like, who the hell needs that much money? Right? Who needs to get paid that much money? Right? And the emotional thing.
Hold on. Isn't that your emotional argument?
No, I'd say my emotional argument.
That's kind of a subjective thing, isn't it?
My emotional argument is empathy.
Okay.
Right? Essentially. Like, and it goes out back to the broad statement, which is, as long as there's anyone starving on this planet, and I get it. It just, I'm talking ideals.
Okay.
Ideals, again, are a starting point. And then you start using...
Yeah,
you have to be pragmatic about your approach to things.
To set what direction we're going to walk in.
Exactly.
And then we narrow it down.
We
find out the exact address we're going to.
And I think when it comes to the left-right group individual thing, that, and I mean, curiously enough, we see this in so many ways, at so many levels, right? We can see the social good, the activity that people will voluntarily undertake. We saw it when in the fires in Fort McMurray, there were people driving along the convoys, just handing out water and toilet paper or whatever, right? You see that. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from here. Just as a society, we can do better, right? And it's that, so if you talk about the logic, it's seeing that we're willing to do these things in isolated incidents, but when it comes to social function, we have a problem wanting to make that happen, let alone making it happen.
So,
right?
So this really isn't about the guy at the bottom end of the distribution. This is about you and your relationship, your emotional reaction to the guy at the top end of the distribution.
To a certain extent, yeah. Like I said, I got no time for him.
Yeah.
Right? I've got zero time and zero patience for any clown who's making 8, 9 figures a year, and there are people, and this is going to be my other point. This is going to be my other.
What's his name? What's his name?
Who, McDonald's dude?
The guy who runs McDonald's.
Chris.
Holy, that's an alphabet. Kimchinsky? Okay, so yeah, this is between your relationship between you and Chris holy, I can't say it. Kim
Chimsky. I'm going to point out that I take a bit of issue of the example that you raised. Okay, you did in good faith, I think, respond to a point that I had made. right?
Yeah.
But there are going to be plenty of examples, and I can do these things to you guys if I want to, right? Where we're going to take someone's point and we're going to be able to find the example. And this came up in conversation earlier. We're going to be able to find the example that can deflate someone else's point and inflate your own. Right. But there are plenty of others. I made the mistake of saying 8 figures. I should have said 9 because there are plenty of them out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, again,
now,
I was surprised.
I didn't know what he made. I just figured McDonald's was.
I was
Right,
surprised to see he only made 8.
Right.
I would have thought he would have been in that 9-figure club as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and I'd be more than happy to run this example with someone who did make 9.
and that's why, and you know, if we multiply that by 10, let's say he did.
Are you
So
gonna
now
try
we're
and find
talking.
one, Steve? While we're going over this, are you gonna?
Well, we don't have to.
Find someone who's got a 9-figure income.
We don't have to, because if we find someone who's got, all we have to do is multiply his by 10, or multiply the number we had. So basically, $45 just went to $450, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Or a buck for
450 people.
hours.
Yeah, a buck
we're
for
up
450
450
hours. Right?
What is that on a work week? 40-hour work week.
I think.
Well, 450 hours would be.
So that's basically going to be 20 cents an hour for each person.
How much?
20 cents an hour. A standard work year is considered roughly 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
Right? So you divide that by...
Quite the example of distributed or concentrated benefit and distributed cost, isn't it?
Right.
Isn't it?
So now you're talking shareholders.
Yeah.
Right? So if the money's not with the guys at the top, but there are plenty of other people under there. My whole point is that there's a lot of money flying around, and the guys at the bottom. This is why I bring it down to power, right? This is why I bring it to the ruling class, the elites. You know, and granted, that's partly emotional.
Can I say something that's also very provocative? But I want to throw it out there just as a discussion or a discussion point, like as intended to really turn your wheels, get you thinking. Now, talked about how you framed it initially as cause and effect. That the guy at the bottom is at the bottom is low money.
I'm going to interrupt you right there. I did not say
money.
Cause and effect. You're the one who brought up.
Yeah.
You raised cause and
I
effect
asked
as a counterpoint.
I asked you to demonstrate it, to explain it to me, and you said that you felt you did. And so then we went further on, and I said, okay, this is really about your relationship between you and the guy at the top. Between Kim Chinsky there making his 10.8 million. And
oh no!
really
Listen, if you want to get into my problems with authority,
no, it's not about that. It's primarily about your relationship to that guy at the top. I'm going to say that even though that's what it is, you framed it in terms of a cause and effect to give yourself moral justification because you know deep down inside it's just about you and the top guy. He's got money.
Oh, bollocks.
You think
balls.
You should take it away.
No, I don't think I should take it away.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay, yes, we're going back to, I mean, this is the way I was raised. This is the way, or not necessarily, I mean, I was raised, but it's also based on my experience through life. And, these are the values I've brought me up to this moment, right? It's not about taking...
It bugs you that guy is that wealthy. It bugs you.
It bugs me.
And you need a moral excuse.
No.
To feel this way.
No, I don't need a moral excuse. The reason it bugs me is because there's all this other stuff, and that is more important to me.
But there's no cause and effect there.
There
isn't one.
Yeah.
There's one does not we say this a lot, and I think this is a good example. Correlation is not causality. The guy making say $100 million a year exists in the world, The guy making $33,000 a year exists in the world.
But I wasn't bringing it up for that cause and
One
effect.
does not cause the other.
I was not bringing it up for the causality between the one. You're the one who raised that.
I
pointed out,
but you framed it that way, my friend.
I made
And
sure.
you and every other progressive starts the phrase.
Oh, don't you even
not justify.
Do
some
not
guy making
throw me in with
$100
every other
million
progressive,
a
you
year
fuck.
when there are poor people in the world.
You can't do that.
You cannot have this conversation without somebody bringing that up. I'm not the one who brings it up. It's always the guy I'm talking to who brings it up.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, well, there's got to be a reason for it.
But
If you press these people, they do come and say, well, yeah, I can't link the two, so why did you bring it up? I'm saying moral cover. It's a smoke screen.
I went out of my way very quickly.
He's giving me the finger, folks. He's giving me the teacher finger.
Not that finger.
Not that finger, the teacher finger. Yeah, not the bird.
I went out of my way very early on when I saw that when it came to the cause and effect, that was not my intention when I made my first statements.
Right.
I feel, looking back, that was dots you connected and you wanted answered, right?
Okay. All right. Fair.
I clarified it fairly quickly after that the reason I brought it up was I don't have a lot of time and patience for a guy who's making that much money to bitch and moan about the fact that he's getting taxed at 50% or 60% or 70%.
So then if a guy doesn't complain about getting taxed 65%, he should be allowed to keep that 100
Separate conversation.
So is your issue
I'm
the
not
guy
gonna,
making $100 million a year or the guy complaining about taxes?
Right now, in the context of the conversation we're having, because I'm not going to, right now, we're not going to break down what I feel is an appropriate taxation rate at what levels.
No,
right?
I just want to know
That's not what I'm
is the issue.
Right now, what I'm talking about,
or just the guy who complains about
well, this came out of a conversation about taxation, right? And so, and like I said, I don't mind paying my taxes.
Yeah.
Right. But I've started having a problem when it's turning out that some guys aren't paying their taxes. Some of the wealthier aren't. And
didn't we say this earlier on that the issue isn't with taxes? The issue is how much is appropriate and how should that tax money be spent? So if it's okay for you and I to question how much is appropriate, is it not allowable for someone making $100 million a year to also ask how much is appropriate?
Yeah, but it's from my personal point of view, and this is just my personal point of view, he can go fuck his hat.
So he's not allowed to question what is appropriate.
Everyone's allowed their opinion.
Well, okay.
Right?
And then,
that's great.
And
go ahead, buddy, have that
action
opinion. I got no time for you. I got no time. If you're going to come to me and whine and cry because you're getting paid $100 million a year, but you only get to keep 25 of it, fuck off. Right? No time for it.
So he shouldn't be allowed to action that opinion.
Sure.
You and I can action our opinions. He's not allowed to.
He can have that opinion.
No. I'm saying action the opinion. In other words, spread it with other people, communicate, try to win over converts to his ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's fundamentally what we are talking about here, right? That is the argument. Left, right, up, down, fucking.
Right. You just have no sympathy for the opinion.
I got no.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Anyone can have an opinion.
And express it, and then try and convince
whether or not I'm going to
of the correctness of that opinion or the validity of that opinion.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there are certain conversations I'm just not going to have. Basically,
okay,
I mean, to me, what it really comes down to, it's absurd.
Okay.
It's fundamentally absurd for anyone to just have that much.
See, this isn't
and B,
it really intrigues me.
And B, to whine about it. Right? What part of it is, and again, it's that self-perpetuation of power. And you want to talk about causality. This is the correlation I see. All right? It's the people making that much money who have the power to maintain the status quo so that they're the ones making that much money. And we talk really big game about individuals and anyone can grow up and be president. Anyone can grow up and be an astronaut. The head of McDonald's.
Or in other words, we talk about social mobility.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's weighted, right? It's not a level playing field, right? Because the people who have it hold on to it. Money is power, right? And so the more you hold on to that shit, the more you keep it. And we also had a discussion last time, and I think we all agreed that the purchasing power of the average citizen has not kept pace with inflation.
No, it has not.
And we're talking like going back 40, 50 years, if I'm not mistaken,
do you think
right?
that's because of CEO salaries have gone up in that time period?
I'm going to say there's a correlation. I'm not going to say it's causality, all right? But the correlation is definitely there because we know that the per capita percentage of wages of executives has gone up phenomenally over that time, and especially in the last 10, 15 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Rates of cigarette smoking have also declined in that same period. That's a correlation. Is it relevant?
Ugh.
Okay,
now I'm giving him that. Now I'm giving him that.
You see where I'm going with this, right? Correlation is meaningless unless there's causality. Where, darts.
I call bullshit on that. I'd say that there are. You look at indicators.
Okay, so then there's a causality.
I'd say there's relevant correlation versus irrelevant correlation. I'll go that far.
Okay.
Because I know if I say there's causality, you're just gonna.
I would hector you to explain the correlation.
And I'm too tired for that right now.
So there's. Are you familiar with the Forbes? I believe it's the Forbes 500.
Yeah, Fortune 500.
Fortune 500.
Yeah.
Do you know what their turnover rate is?
I imagine that the top 10 is probably rotating once. The top 2 or 3 is probably switching places once in a while.
Yeah, but
the top
staying
10,
within the top 100 should be pretty constant, right?
Not necessarily. I especially you're talking Sting. I can imagine Sting not being in the top 500 anymore because everything else nowadays is tech related, right? Like there are some goofy people making goofy money for goofy things.
That's true.
Right. So I would not be surprised to find Sting. I wouldn't be surprised to find Paul McCartney was like down in the 5,000s, right? I mean,
I was reading. Are you familiar with Thomas Sowell?
He was one of the Beatles, by the way, there, folks, just in case you didn't know that.
Not Thomas Sowell, Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney.
You know what? Given anybody under the age of 25, they might need that clarification.
I actually heard in the 90s.
It's like Thomas Sowell, wasn't he the original drummer? No.
I heard back in the 90s, someone said Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
I can't even talk to you.
That's been quite the cultural marker, hasn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. You were talking about some
Thomas Sowell. He's an economist.
Name drop it again.
He did a lot of work. Oh, you sent me a text. He did a lot of work on that.
Thomas Sowell sent you a text?
No. I wish Thomas Sowell would send me a text. If Thomas Sowell was sending me texts, he wouldn't be sitting here, having this. He'd be like in my university office somewhere. Anyway, the turnover rate in that Fortune 500 is exceedingly high.
I believe it.
Year over year from, and it's almost 100% over a 2-year period. So how do you reconcile that with your idea that if you got money, it accumulates at the top? That if you got money, you're going to keep that money. The rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer.
Okay. I can't speak to this.
How can I square that circle?
Oh, it's not that square of a circle to be done.
Okay,
I mean, it's
okay, but then how do I reconcile what you're saying with what Sowell was saying?
Well, I mean, you're talking about a finite number, which is 500. So someone's gonna be those 500. So maybe someone drops from 363 to 501, right? Oh, boo-hoo. Right? He might even have the same amount of money. It's just some other people have gotten more, right? That's dropped him to 501. Doesn't mean he's not rich anymore. It just means he's not part of the top 500, right?
So no,
there's also
that's in a relevancy to you.
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of ways we could take that same concept, right?
Yeah.
We could say, okay, what is the total value of the top 500 last year compared to this year,
Okay.
right? Irrespective of who's on it, right? And I'm sure, to your point, there are probably some guys, some people who may have lost everything. And there may be some people who have come from nowhere, right? I'm just saying, as part of the capitalist system, and I think I don't think that's a fist waving lefty thing to say. As part of the capitalist system, this is how it works. People at the top like to be at the top. They got there, and full marks to them for getting where they're at. Mostly, right?
Yeah.
But some of them will have probably undertaken some shady business practices. Some of them may have done some unethical things when it comes to their workers.
This is another thing that intrigues me about that. That you automatically associate fortune and wealth with dishonesty.
Well, you don't have to look farther than the Mexican border for that. When it comes to some of the cartels, right? I mean,
But those guys are already a criminal enterprise.
Right. And
But I'm talking about, say, someone who...
I'm not...
say, Manitoulin Transport. The founders of Manitoulin Transport, they retired incredibly wealthy when they sold off that company. Millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Who did they cheat?
I'm not... And see, and again, you can't twist everything that comes out of my mouth to say that I'm calling every capitalist a bad person. I said some of... I
kind of did.
How did I start that statement? I said fair play to them. A lot of them have gotten there by hard work and ability.
Every time we have this conversation,
and I said,
always kind of make the little assertion that they're dirty.
I said, so long as some of them may have done, some of them may have done some unethical things, some shady stuff. Yeah. Some of them, I said some, right? Okay. That's not even implying 51%.
Okay, you're just saying that some unethical, sharp practice, exploitative practice does exist in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. I know it's going to go on that.
It's part of capitalism, right?
Well, it's part of life.
Yeah. It's part of life, too.
I mean,
absolutely. Good point.
I mean, exploitative, dishonest people have existed in every system.
And that comes down to personality. Absolutely right. Personality types are across the board.
Do you think it's baked into the cake in capitalism?
I think it's more likely to attract people who are going to succeed.
That you don't think that those same forces and those same attractions would you don't think those same forces and attractions would exist in a more centrally planned or a more government-controlled economy? In other words, that they wouldn't exist within a bureaucracy?
Oh, I'm sure they do, because as we just determined, different personality types are all over the place. And yes, you're going to have certain types of people who make it to the top of a bureaucracy.
But you still feel that government-owned bureaucracy is preferable to a capitalist system?
Not by a long shot. Not necessarily at all. And we've had that discussion before, too.
That's good. I'm glad that's on tape.
What?
Or tape or digit or whatever. That's on our record.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves, yeah.
But I want to maybe look at it from a slightly different angle. Because I always think when progressives start with, there's too much money over here, and there's too little money over here, and someone would need this money. There's never enough money over here to alleviate the suffering that's going over there. Like the $1 for 45 hours example, right? Yeah. So I want to use the example. Back in, but I think before she officially announced her run, so about 2014, before Hillary Clinton, I think, had officially announced her run for president, she was talking about ExxonMobil had posted to date the largest profit a U.S. corporation had posted. What I have on the screen is actually from last year, which they broke that record. So ExxonMobil for the year, so this is a 2022 article, so for the year 2021.
Yep. Right? $100 billion.
No, the profit.
Added more. Holy cats.
The profit was $23 billion for the year. But that was on $285 million of revenue. So they posted a less than 10% profit.
Really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
And a lot of it is now, when you're at the scale of ExxonMobil, I think you can afford to do that on the cash flow model. But when you get into a small business who doesn't do 10% or 20% profit, they're not open very long.
No, it's true.
Right?
Yep.
You need more than 10.
So, I mean, back when she started, because Hillary was proposing, while she was still a senator, she was proposing a tax on these
outrageous profits. Yeah.
So somebody else, it might have been AEI or it might have been Cato, had started crunching the numbers on Walmart. Walmart at that time was the 11th largest economy in the world. And they figured out if the U.S. government seized everything, CEO compensation, all the cash reserves, all the real estate, everything, and got $1 per buck on it, so got what his valuation was.
Yeah, got actual value for it.
It would run the U.S. government for less than a quarter.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's the 11th largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Not the 11th largest economy, the 11th largest economy
in
the world.
And it would run the U.S.
government
for less than a fiscal quarter.
For less than a fiscal quarter.
I mean, you're taking the conversation in yet another direction.
Your thoughts, Trent.
We've already... Okay, well, we're going to get into big government now?
No, just the idea of redistribution as its effectiveness. Is the juice worth the squeeze?
There's not enough money at the top end to
really
alleviate
affect
all the suffering at the bottom end.
Yeah.
Oh, well then fuck it. Let's not.
Well, hang on. Can I maybe give you a bit of ammo? Sometimes I like to work the other side of the street.
Trent tilts his head suspicious. Where the hell is this going?
Part of the thing I want to say before your point is like, it's my belief, and I think it's borne out, is that the economics is not a zero-sum game. Lots of progressives think it's a zero-sum game, so that the money at the top end is taking away from the bottom end.
Yeah.
But I think my assertion that there's not enough money at the top end to alleviate the suffering at the bottom end kind of supports the idea that it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, that there's no connection. There's no cause and effect relationship.
Right.
But if I can be devil's advocate, and you tell me if you would subscribe to this.
Okay.
Or before you start, you've been filibustering me for the last
time. Oh, man, will you give him a chance? No, there's no stopping.
The thing is, like, there probably is a causal relationship between the money at the top and the suffering at the bottom. But my belief is that money, this will be a very Randian statement, is that money and that suffering is largely the result, or that connection is largely the result of government intervention. So we've talked a lot, we haven't mentioned it, though it needs to be one of our terms that we define. We've talked a lot about crony capitalism, and nobody around this table likes crony capitalism.
Nope.
Right?
No.
Nobody, when you're talking about KPMG and their criminals that they got off, right? Yeah. Nobody here supports that. We would be happy to see all those people go to jail.
Yeah.
Right? For very long sentences.
Yeah.
Nobody here would do that. But that's a government intervention. You know, ExxonMobil gets a lot of money from the U.S. taxpayer. I don't think that should happen. Right? They don't need it.
Right.
They'd be fine. Right? And Encana, Synovus, name your Canadian energy company, name any number of companies get a lot of money, either subsidies, tax cuts or subsidies or something.
Any kind of subsidy is. Let's just say that I think it's a fair statement to say that all three of us around the table here are saying there would have to be some pretty solid justification for any subsidy before we would agree with it.
Right.
I know something you wanted to say.
Yeah.
I just have an off the cuff response to what you just said, because you just said something about, you would argue that it's government intervention is that exacerbates or is the prism, the lens for the discrepancy between the top and the suffering at the bottom, right? Midway through that paragraph, that statement that you were making, I was thinking of the other conversation we'd had earlier about fascist Spain. I don't know why it came to my head, right? It was kind of like the elites and the power and keeping people in their place. And then when you got to the bit about government intervention causing that suffering, right? That's I was just laughing inside because that's where I've been going. Because Franco and his government, they worked to maintain that misery at the bottom, which is what that Civil War was all about. It was about the rights of workers. It wasn't so much, in my mind, I don't believe, it was as much as about the rights of the workers as it was about the redistribution of wealth itself. Right. Anyways,
Well,
you had
yeah.
something you wanted to say.
So I'm going to work your side of the street. You tell me if I'm wrong. That many progressives will admit, once faced with this example, that yes, there may not be enough money at the top to make any kind of effective alleviation of the suffering at the bottom, but that's not the point. Sometimes you don't do something because it's effective. You do it for the moral, it's not about the effect on the ground. It's about the principle. Am I lying?
Well, yeah, again, but the principle is the ideal.
Right.
Right?
It doesn't matter whether or not the policy actually works. It's about the principle behind the policy.
That's the starting point. You're absolutely. I would agree with that. Right? That we have to be doing our best. Right? What pops into my mind at that point is Lincoln's statement about the angels of our better nature. Right. This is what we need to be appealing to at all times. I believe, with certain regressions, especially lately, that this has been the progression of humanity, has been the ever-evolving connection with the better angels of our minds. Right?
I would say that this is a fundamental difference today between the right and the left, in that the left very much believes this, that intentions and principles are fundamental planks of public policy.
Well, this is...
Whereas the right believes that they pale in comparison to effect, that the effect of policy must trump any intent. Like whatever your intent was, whatever you wanted to achieve, whatever stated goal you were working for, must be secondary to the actual effects of that policy. And I think there's fundamental disagreement between left and right on that. Whereas left says, no, the effect of that policy is secondary to the intent.
Whoa. Okay, so sidebar to that, because usually when intent comes up in conversation for me, it's usually in terms of laws and regulations and stuff, and so it's...
Or say principle.
Right, so...
Or the morality. Or the moral justification or principle. Use that word instead of intent.
No, but you've actually added a third element to what is usually a two-concept paradigm. So it's intent versus rule, right? But you've added effect to that.
Yeah, what is the result of the legislation?
So I think the effect, it doesn't matter whether it's the rule of the law or the intent of it. What is the effect?
Right.
Right. The effect is going to be, that's the zero sum.
Right.
Right. The effect is, that's what you measure the effectiveness of either the intent or the law against. That was a sidebar.
But I think it's relevant because in this example of wealth redistribution, Steve's example shows that you're not having a whole lot of effect on the ground for the people at the bottom of the distribution, but you are having profound effect everywhere else. Another example which comes up a lot is minimum wage legislation, where people on the right look at this and say, you're not helping the people actually earning the lowest wages in the economic system. In fact, you're hurting these people by causing less employment. And the other side of the coin is often say, look, that's not the point. It's the principle behind minimum wage.
Yeah, but my response to that is, again, gray area, right?
Yeah.
Intent alone, and this is what I was talking about earlier about, one of the worst things that's been stated in the last 10 years is the whole concept of intolerance of intolerance, right? Because that just opened up this Pandora's box where everyone can just do whatever they want, right? Intent cannot be the be-all and end-all, right? First of all, it's going to depend on what that intent is. It's going to be about how you practically approach it. And then, again, what are the results, right? Where you say left, now we're entering the territory where I'm going to say, I'm going to deflect that. I'm going to bat that away. I'm going to say it belongs over there, and it's called woke. And I got no time for that either, right? As far as I'm concerned, with woke, we got the Robespierrean, counter revolutionary, and this is the left achieving the same levels of the worst of the right.
So you're saying it's an extreme offshoot that's not mainstream.
It's interesting using the term mainstream these days. I don't even know what that means, right? Mainstream seems to be for moderates.
Well, mainstream's like the most people, the biggest share of
well, then I would argue that is not necessarily woke.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I don't think woke is the majority of the population.
Woke are the loudest. They're the loudest on the left, just like that we've got the loudest on the right.
Yeah. The woke just happens to control the microphones right now.
Well, yeah, they're all but so are the equivalent on the right. I mean, they don't have a name, but the ultra right is just as goofy and opinionated and extreme as the woke, right? But it's that type of thing that dominates the airwaves, right? So there's this perception at the political level that politicians and leaders, in order to get reelected, they have to respond to this.
Well, I mean, there's a very, very common trope that we throw around a lot in conservative circles. It's that progressives don't know things, they feel them. That we like to look down from our obvious, ideological superiority, right? That in our hubris, we like to look down and say that we on the right think analytically, whereas on the left they think emotionally. And I thought, okay, as smugly satisfying as that might be, I can't believe that that's actually what's happening. There's got to be more to it. And so I try to put myself in the position of someone arguing for, say, for example, minimum wage. And where I come to is that we need to ask ourselves, and again, I'm putting myself in the position of a progressive policy advocate, to say that at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves, what do we stand for? What principles govern us, even if they're messy, even if they're inefficient, even if they are not perfect, even if they're flawed? What principles are we going to stand for and say, this is who we are? That we're not going to be strictly utilitarian. We're not going to be governed purely by a binary code. That we want to leave room for humanity. We want to leave room for subtlety. We want to leave room for nuance. And I believe I believe this is where the average progressive is coming from in these questions. To say, yeah, okay, I appreciate that maybe redistributing income isn't really going to have the effect that I want. That say, taking a guy who's making 8-figure income and only letting him keep 7, and then redistribute the rest, is it really going to help a lot of people? No, probably not. But that's not the point. It's about the principles by which we wish to live. That's where I think they're coming from.
Yeah, I would agree with that to a certain extent. But
there you go. Hate's conservative advantage demonstrated right there.
Your perception is acute.
He had a look on his face, folks, like he just bit into a lemon when he said that.
No, it's good. But from there, for me, the conversation goes to, well, it's naturally going to feed on itself into something else, right? To use your example, if we take a guy and say, okay, you're making 8 figures a year.
Yeah.
we're going to make that the official number, right? You're making 8 figures a year. You should feel really good about yourself because you've worked hard. You're good at what you do. You make 8 figures a year, right? We're going to take 75% of that away, right? And we're going to do some stuff with it, right? So there's what we've calculated to be the limited effect of doing that, right? Now, I'm going to say that, you know what?
Like limited benefit on the ground.
Well, as we just did the math.
Yeah, okay.
Right? You know, we just figured out that...
I wanted to make sure I knew what you were talking about.
At best, we're talking 20 cents an hour for the people at the bottom, right? For every single one of them, right? But that's something, right? But in a less tangible form, when we say these things, we do these things, and this is the approach we take, and this is a value we are espousing as a social construct, as a group, and we're saying this is what's important to us. And when we have that mentality, that feeds into a whole bunch of other things that we do, right? And so the example I always use is just I look at the Western Europeans and us. And there are some big differences. Actually, the biggest difference I actually figured out. And you want to talk about? I figured this out 20 years ago when I was driving in Spain and Italy, 2 years running, right? And you want to talk about the difference between collective thinking and individualism, right? Now, this was 20 years ago. At the time, I felt that North Americans were very cautious. It's better to do it from the European point of view. Europeans had to do some crazy shit to get places. And as a North American driving there, I was overly cautious.
I was as soon as you were talking about what you noticed in differences between North America and Europe, as soon as you talked about driving in Italy and Spain, my thoughts instantly went to hair-raising encounters.
Well, it was
Italian roads.
My first thing was in Barcelona, right? So I was.
What's that?
I noticed how many hair to raise.
On the back of our necks. On the backs of our necks.
I was coming out of an alley to turn onto a main road.
Yeah.
Right? But it was a constant stream of pedestrians. Constant.
Yeah.
Now, here, pedestrian has the right of way.
Yeah.
Right? So I just sat there patiently waiting for the break in the program. Didn't come.
Yeah. Whereas the local...
Right? I realized, okay, logically,
Yeah.
there's only one way out of this situation, aside from backing down the alley.
Yeah.
Right?
I
just have to slowly push through, and eventually they're all going to go behind me instead of in front of me.
Yeah.
Right? So I did that, and it worked.
Yeah.
Right? Later that same day, a day later, 2 days later, there was a free, like an auto route overpass, and screwily enough, I had to come up at a 45-degree angle on a ramp, stop, and go to another 45-degree angle ramp coming off the other side of this motorway to get to where I needed to go. It was like an intersection up in the air, right? And it wasn't heavy traffic, but it was fast, bloody traffic, and you just had to gauge how people were coming, right? And how fast they were coming, and I was just like, I didn't know if I was going to make it if I tromped on the gas just to go these 30 feet across this motorway. But eventually I realized you had to do it, right? You just had to suck it up and pucker up and just boom, go, right? And it was this, those are two examples of what I realized over there. It was, they drive like crazy, so they're not cautious, but they're aware, right? In North America, it's the reverse. We are aware.
Unaware.
We're
very cautious.
Unaware, but we're not doing stupid things, right? Over there, they're all doing stupid things. Like I started doing stupid things in Italy the next year. I was doing some crazy ass stuff,
here.
right?
Yeah.
And like once I had to do like a 135-degree turn because I'd missed my turn, right? So I did this right-hand turn, and I had to swing into oncoming traffic. But I was like, screw it, because I knew that they were going to be expecting it. And sure enough, they all knew I was doing it. They all started turning. They were all honking at me and giving me the Italian thumb biting and stuff like that. But that's how it works, right? Here, we're unaware, but we're not doing stupid things. We weren't back then. What's happened now is I've noticed the driving here. People are doing stupid things, and they're still not aware, right? That's the big difference. But anyways, that's so... I'm sorry I rambled on there for you guys and for the listeners, but that was the whole point. Is the difference between Europeans and ourselves, I think, is the more we do things like that, we say to ourselves, okay, Buddy can make 80 million a year. He's only going to end up with 20. That's okay, right? We're going to take that, we're going to do something with it, right? The tangibility of it, as we've done the calculations, it's not going to be great, right? That's where we get into the big government and effectiveness of application of our taxes. And I think that's a conversation we're all going to agree on as well. There are way better ways to be running things out there. Anyway, sorry, I hijacked the conversation.
Do you think so? So we take that guy who's making 8 figures, and we take away 2 figures from him. Do you think he still does what he does?
He should.
Do you think he will? Or will he go find something else to do that's a lot less
effort?
What do you
mean by he should? Like he should, like he has a
well, I mean, it's...
Or he just figure, well, it's not going to change his guy.
Like, does he say, look, I am not willing to do this job unless I get to keep my salary? If you're going to take away, like, say, 70% of my earnings, I'm not willing to do this anymore.
You know what? Then screw him, because I'm willing to bet that any 3 of the people sitting around this table could take that job for less, be happy with it, and do it.
I sure so.
I don't think I could.
What do you think CEO workdays are like?
I know for a fact I could not run McDonald's. I know for a fact.
I think you're selling yourself short. I think you've got the brains. I think within a year you could run McDonald's. And I think the same of you.
Sure.
I
never said I
don't
couldn't,
think so.
But my thing is that CEOs never go off duty. Regardless of whether they go on vacation, they take work with them.
Yeah, that's true.
You cannot leave your job at the office if you're a CEO. You're on call 24/7 for
24/7.
You know, there's plenty of CEOs of smaller companies who are doing the same thing for a lot less.
Okay.
All right.
McDonald's guy there is never off duty. Same as like the president. He's never off duty, right? Whether he's at Camp David, whether he's in Martha's Vineyard, whether he's wherever.
All I'm saying
is back to Delaware.
There's going to be a watershed. You're right. That's going to be up to him. Again, it's in a lot of ways, it's all about social conditioning. It's how we define ourselves as a society. There's a whole bunch of stuff playing into this. Does he want to do it for less? Does he not want to do it? I can't speak to that, right?
It's to me, it's like, number one, if just thinking right off the top, if I'm going to be CEO of McDonald's, I need to know a lot about real estate, because I know that that's how McDonald's makes their money.
Yeah, McDonald's is a real estate company that I have.
It's a real estate company that does restaurants on the side to enhance the value of their properties. Yeah. I have to understand logistics, the amount of foodstuffs that they're moving over massive distances.
Yeah.
For example, like I remember seeing a documentary on how they set up their first restaurant in Moscow, and the arrangements that they had to make. Incredible, like the precision timetable movements of their logistics operation was huge. You have to have an incredible HR background, because you are working with a huge number, like 200,000 employees, with a variety of labor laws, with a variety of regulations around them. You have to understand market analytics to know what foods are going to be popular, what won't be. Managing of change. For example, McDonald's has tried very hard, I think, to get in front of certain trends, like lighter calorie foods, banning plastic straws. Some of these are based on their products. Some of these are based on peripheral things like the straws. It's not their product per se, but it goes with their product. I don't know enough about any of these things. And a year would not be enough time to teach them to me.
Everything that just came out of your mouth, with the exception of the statement you made at the beginning and the end, that you don't know enough of those things to do the job, convinces me that you could do the job.
Well, then why hasn't McDonald's found somebody for a lot less than $10.8 million?
Again,
because you were saying, like, the whole benefit, keep costs down, right? That's what the shareholders want. Keep the costs down. Yeah. Well, if they could pay a guy for $1 million who do just as good a job, how come they haven't?
Again, there's a lot playing into this. My argument would be that this is the expectation at all levels, right? It's even the expectation of the company that they're going to bring in someone who knows the things that you do. You just listed. It's going to be their expectation that that person is going to expect $10.8 million a year.
That level of compensation.
Right? So, so many of the things we talk about, they are, when it boils down to it, they're all being measured at a social level, at a cultural level, at a societal level. Right? These things, in a lot of ways, they take generations to change. Right?
I read in a magazine article not long ago, we were talking about how CEO compensation has drastically climbed in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Whereas average purchasing power within the economy has actually somewhat declined.
Yeah.
And the article was saying that as we've globalized our marketplaces, that almost all companies now are on an international level, either in customer base or supply chain or both, that the complexity of business is running a large company is far more involved and far more complex than it was in the past, in the pre-information age.
Yeah.
And that because of this globalization of supply chain and customer base, many businesses that were generally not linked or had very little in common now do have things in common. And that it means that more companies are competing. Or, first of all, it said that there are very few people who have the skill sets needed to run a company successfully on that global level. And there are more companies now competing for that labor pool than ever before, which is part of the reason why there has been such an exponential rise in salaries. Would you say that makes sense, or do you think it's rubbish?
That sounds like it could make sense. Right? Absolutely it could. But again, it's based on expectation.
So
right?
Then if we're going to start confiscating those big incomes, you don't think that would have a huge unintended consequence, a massive ripple effect?
I'm saying we're already confiscating those incomes. We're talking about taxes.
Yeah, but we're not talking about it at, say, 75, 80%.
Well, I don't know what the high end is federally or in the, in the... What's that?
39%.
And I think
it's higher if you're not in Alberta.
Yeah, and
that's
like
what I'm saying.
told, all three levels of government capital gains, I think these guys are looking at 55 to 60.
Yeah, well, in the end...
The highest ranges
are
looking at 55 to 60. 55 to 65.
Just about every Canadian pays about 50% of their income in taxes because of once you start excise taxes and sales taxes and stuff like that.
And for that the top quintile, it's about another 5-10%.
Yeah,
and that's fairly constant throughout the Western world.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, the income tax rate is 39%.
But this isn't what's being proposed. This isn't part of the wealth tax that's now being proposed in Ottawa. This isn't. I mean, that's not enough for the higher end taxes being proposed by, say, certain voices within the Democratic Party or certain voices within coalition governments in the European Union, where they are talking about 75, 80, 85%.
Well, and one thing, when you start talking about these numbers, right, like you say that, that upper 1% tax rate is constant throughout the Western world. What isn't constant throughout the Western world is middle class tax rates.
No.
Right? You start going to Europe, and the middle class and upper middle class are paying the same as what the CEOs are paying.
Yeah.
They're all paying 65.
Everybody is paying 55 to 65.
Yeah, and I disagree with that too.
And
I mean,
it's a very North American thing where the middle class does not try to pay their freight, as it were.
Yes. I got another question for you.
I actually have a couple for you guys.
He mentioned Kevin Williamson, and Kevin Williamson once wrote that he felt that no one should ever have to pay more than $1 million in taxes, ever. That once you paid $1 million every year, again, this is a theoretical talking point. Once you paid $1 million, you're good.
Yeah, you know what?
You're done.
That's flawed. That's the exact.
Why?
That's the exact.
If you,
just to throw
something on the wall and see what sticks. if you've paid $1 million every single year, haven't you done enough? Haven't you as an individual contributed?
My only response
when
to that
everyone else
is
is paying like say if I'm making $80,000 a year and I'm paying say about half of that in taxes, so I'm kicking in say 40,000.
yeah.
And this guy's paying $1 million. Hasn't he done his fair share?
It's the flip side of the argument I use, right? It's literally the exact flip side of the argument I use. My argument is if you're making $80 million a year, using this as the example, what do you need the other 79 for, right? $1 million is what people fight for on Survivor, right? That's lifetime, right? And they have to go through some grueling shit for it.
Right.
You're telling me that $1 million a year isn't enough, right?
Well, I'm saying no.
Right?
It should be
No,
enough.
no. That's what I'm saying.
Look,
right?
man, a 911 GT3 is $350,000 US plus dealer markup, which is almost double. So that makes it $600,000. I really want one of those cars
All right. Why?
because there's no car like it.
Yeah, and then you get bored of it and go buy something. And oh no,
Well,
that's
true. And then
that's-
that car goes into the secondhand market.
well, presumably you've already paid for your house.
This
probably
is,
a couple of them.
to me, the perfect quintessential discussion between left and right. The guy on the right says, "This is what I want to do," and the guy on the left says, "I'm going to decide whether or not you should be allowed to do it."
I don't think that accurately fully characterizes
You will
the
never,
conversation.
ever see a conservative saying, "You don't need that."
Yeah, you will.
When? Where do you see that in conservative parlance?
Minimum wage is this. You don't need any more of that.
No. You say let the employer and the employee decide what minimum wage is. Don't impose that upon them from the top. We're not saying that. We've never, ever said that we feel that we should be able to impose what the wage is. We've never said that. We've always said that should be the voluntary exchange.
In my mind, you're not doing yourself any favors by making that argument.
How so?
Because you're saying...
You don't think that's coherent?
You just stated in my mind, we don't even think there should be a minimum wage.
You're right.
If some guy can get away with paying people nothing, he should be allowed to get away with paying people nothing.
You're right. He should be allowed to get away with paying people nothing. And who would work for him?
You know, the guy who's so desperate he'll take free burgers as pay.
Well, he's still getting
That,
paid.
that's something. That's
He's not getting paid nothing.
It's not pay. Yeah, I get it, but obviously I was using an exaggerated example.
Well, like,
right?
let's say a guy wants says, well, right now minimum wage is like say $15. I run a warehouse.
Yeah.
I want to be able to pay guys $5. Well, if you pay peanuts, you're going to get monkeys. How well do you think that warehouse is going to run if he is paying absolutely?
Yeah, but when are we
less
talking?
than
Are we talking?
anybody else?
Are we talking 2007? Or are we
No,
talking
talking
2009? Right? No, I'm just saying that's going to fluctuate, right? Because you're going to have enough unemployed people who you can have enough unemployed people in 2009.
Yep.
They're going to work for $5 because they're otherwise making nothing. 2007, you're not going to get anyone for under 25.
Okay. So
Right?
let's say 2009, where you got a lot of desperate people.
Yeah,
The second a better opportunity comes by, you think they're not going to leap at it?
probably.
So then what costs does that hit the guy running the warehouse where he's continually got churn and he's continually training new employees? And when he's continually drawing from the absolute bottom of the labor barrel.
Oh, but believe me, I've worked at those places that do that.
That doesn't impose costs.
I've worked at the places that do that.
I mean, there is a very common myth out there that Henry Ford wanted to pay his workers enough that they could buy the car. That's not actually that's not actually true. Henry Ford got tired of the costs involved in employee turnover.
Right.
And so he said, look, I'm going to raise the salaries of my employees so that they're not ditching me for the first opportunity that comes elsewhere. I'm going to overpay market so that I have a stable workforce.
But see, here, to me, you just argued the complexity of the situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
overpaid the market, right?
Yeah.
I disagree with that statement fundamentally, right? Because he wasn't. Because there was value to him. There was an intrinsic, intangible value that he made tangible in terms of avoiding that turnover, right? So he wasn't overpaying the market. He was paying the market. He was creating his own market concept, right? And there's
sure, and that means that you feel you should be able to go in and impose your morality, your values upon Henry Ford and his company. You never worked for Ford. You don't run a car company. You don't know a situation.
Actually,
but you feel you should be able to go in there and impose your morality upon him. This is a fundamentally progressive view.
I think we have to be careful of is the whole concept of, because what I hear in a lot of, and I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but what can be heard is that imposing any morality on anything is a bad thing. Right? Now we're back to our original statement. Somewhere between 0 and 100 is where we're defining that morality. Right?
Well,
that's the constant challenge.
How about maybe would you agree then that a conservative position is to draw a bigger distinction between economics and morality, and a progressive position is to see them as more closely linked?
I'll tell you literally where my mind just went with that. Is that for me, the right can be very snobbish, very class conscious, and they are going to judge people on economic status, right? So I don't see the right making that distinction, right? At least at that level.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of policy, yeah, I can see them making that distinction, right? But again, this is where it's dangerous to be left and right, because when you talk specifically about morality, right? I would say that it has, until recently, it's actually been the purview of the right to be pushing morality on others.
I would agree with
right?
you on that.
Now that's the social right, so which is why we make a distinction between the social right and the fiscal right.
Brother, if you want to see a place erupt into fistfights and throwing them over tables, I recommend you two venues. You put a bunch of Colt 45 advocates on one side and a bunch of Glock guys on the other. And then for the next one, put a bunch of social conservatives on one side of the table and economic conservatives on the other side of the table. And watch them go.
Well, we're seeing that play out. We're seeing that play out nationally.
Oh, yeah. It's a Pier 6er, I tell you.
We see that...
Oh, yes.
We're seeing that provincially. We're seeing that nationally.
Absolutely.
As far as the Glock 45 thing, I imagine that is a very different demographic. It's like that's going to be like people are riding pocket rockets versus people are riding Harleys, right?
Exactly.
You know, like
yeah.
And I know who my money's on.
And it ends there. Yeah, gents, I think that's been a good talk, but I think this is a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean we could go on forever.
We could.
And so we'll do that 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, for sure.
Hopefully.
Alrighty.
Well, thank you, everyone. Hopefully you're still here and listening and haven't tuned out. And we'll see you next time.